So let's jump right into this panel discussion. And what I want to open with, since we just heard from Klaus and we heard from Oliver from a service provider perspective, here's my first question directed to you guys to get us kicked off. What do you see as the industry's biggest barriers to realizing zero-touch services management and network automation? Is it software, tools, technology, people, or something else? Oliver?
Can I just say yes?
All right, next question.
Yeah.
Thank you. I can see this is going to go very quickly.
Yeah, thanks for that. I did read your questions diligently over the weekend and thought a lot about them and didn't come to particularly any conclusions other than, one of the standard answers would always be to say, it's people and culture and process and all those kind of things. It is, of course, what we've really experienced, I think, recently is just that it's testing, it's integration. As I mentioned, you can test something in a lab and you can get things technically correct as you would think they would work at a certain layer or even between, but until you put it out in the real world, you don't know. There's just so many parameters. You look at the security, I didn't even mention that. The number of tunnels that we have to build back to our management domain and dealing with all the VPNs that are underneath and then all the networking issues, etc. before you even get to the application layer that needs to build itself and work with any new reference model that there may be. So I think we need all of it, I don't know if I could pick one area that's more important than the other. Perhaps, though, to be integrated, you do need as much openness, I think, you mentioned it. Whether we like it or not, it's our customers who are driving, or the businesses that are driving.
Right.
And that means that we've got to have more open standards, more open collaboration, more open source, more open X, if you like, between everything in the way that we work.
Klaus, anything you would add?
I think I intend to agree with Oliver what he said before, but I like to add another aspect in this discussion because based on my experience or what I see what happens in the industry for the time being is that we have more or less a competition between SDOs and standards and open source organization. I think that is one obstacle that we have to solve very quickly, because otherwise we are fighting about the best solution, and that is not very useful. Not useful for us in industry, and definitely not useful for us as an operator. Right. And that's what concerns me a little bit. That we have too many silo thinking in this game, in this area, and I think. As I said, in ZSM and ETSI, we try to break that open, to make a more open discussion, make more open-minded discussion about what is the best solution for us as an industry. Sure. And that is my major concern that I have.
Vendor team, anything you would add? Anybody to that?
Yeah, I can add, I think we have to have trust. We have to have trust between operators and vendors. We have to have trust in the operator, different organizations. To build that trust, you have to go in stages. You have to start in sort of in small and build up that, so that people understand that this is good. This is not going to ruin my network.
So I agree. I mean, it's all of the above, but it's not all of the above in isolation, right? It's all of the above joined up, right? And I think we saw some of the issues that the CSPs have, and always comes out on the top is service agility, business agility, being able to introduce new capabilities quickly. I've been doing this for 30 years. That's been at the top every year, right? So simply introducing a new technology at the bottom isn't necessarily going to solve that, right? So I would like to say you need to look at what is your business objectives, what are your organizational objectives, and how can this technology start to fix those problems? Simply plugging in new stuff at the bottom and connecting it to all your existing processes may not achieve what you hope to achieve. It might, right? I doubt it, but it might. So I think it's having that vision, it's having that objective, and then looking at all those things joined up and having those discussions. And then you need to focus on the small things, right? But small things towards a goal rather than just small things that you know how to do.
Awesome. Okay. I'm gonna go to the next question. Simon, I'll start with you here. because of part of what we just heard there, we're talking about maturity of solutions and other pieces. So how mature would you rate the vendor and open source communities, SDN, NFV, orchestration, network abstraction, data modeling, APIs? There's a lot happening, right? And what evidence would you have to support this position? Do you think we're at a point where we will begin to accelerate real-world commercial deployments? It's a lot.
So it's a lot, right? And every time you mentioned and, the maturity went down, down, and down, right? I mean, I think if you look at some of the capabilities we have very close to the infrastructure, some of the open source that we have around simple orchestration processes, it's getting there, right? I mean, I think 2 or 3 years ago, everybody was still, this is never going to work, and now that's not the issue. It is working. So I think the maturity there. I think the maturity when it gets close to APIs and things like that, I think is lacking. One of the things I like about the ZSM program is that it's actually trying to focus on the end-to-end debate. I mean, it's recognizing that the rise of the domain is happening.
That's one of the things. One of the things I really like about it. Is that
it's recognizing the rise of the domain. It's also recognizing that you need to connect that into the business. That's what I like, and hopefully that will drive some of the maturity. I think there's a recognition that perhaps some capabilities, particularly around CI/CD frameworks, I think they're getting really quite mature now, and we see that in a lot of our capabilities, both within our own products, but also within the customer environments as well. So it's getting there, but there's a long way to go.
Okay. Anybody want to add anything to that? Anybody? Okay. I'm gonna keep going. Yeah, we're doing good on time. That's great. Per, let's bring you into the conversation here, which is what would you consider to be the state of network telemetry, or the ability to get the right data in the right place for analytics and artificial intelligence machine learning tools to be able to access? Is there still a lot of work to be done there? And last question related is, will the equipment we already have in the network need to be replaced?
Easy questions where the answer is always yes, but then with a but. And I think the net here is that as we think through use cases, as we think through what we want to do with the data, we're always going to end up with a case of, do I need this data for this use case for a short period of time, or do I need that data for all of my sessions across all of my network all of the time?
Right.
And that drives that if you today traditionally have data sources that gives you data all of the time for all sessions, that turns out to be in many cases pretty expensive. Right. And at the end of the day, you maybe use 2, 3, 4% of that data to do anything meaningful with.
Right.
So the key is to get the right data sources for when you need it, with the right capabilities at that point. And we are right now generally good at providing all data all time, and we need to go down to that business agility of providing the right data at the right time at the right cost.
Go ahead, sorry.
And let me just add, based on your last question, this basically means that if you, for example, take a feed from a network element, regardless of whether it's physical or virtual, then at that point it's going to tell you when things are working relatively okay. But at the point, if you think about, for example, sleepy cells in 3G or so on, there was no network element feed to give you the cell is now sleeping. Because it was obviously a state which the cell ended up in where you couldn't recover from it other from, for example, a reboot. So at that point, we developed techniques using other metrics to decide that this cell is sleeping. Gotcha. So now we need to consider about what use cases we have. We need to know what is the data we need for that. And it's not always from within the node. It needs to be sometimes part of the complete end-to-end chain.
Right. Let me ask this to the service providers. For the longest time, we used tools like SNMP, and we had to go out and ping the network elements and extract that information. Obviously, we're going way away from that with things like streaming telemetry and those types of approaches. Is our network infrastructure ready for streaming telemetry, and can we just add that? And are you guys using that today to the service provider side? So go ahead, Oliver, and then I'll jump back to the vendors.
Yeah, we've actually got a new product we brought out. It's actually on the security side, but I like it because it's taking NetFlow and we're doing some algorithmic analysis actually for, the security. ML's good in the security world because it's good for pattern spotting. And and on the network side, we've got small pockets of use, particularly in 5G and certain applications. What we haven't really got on the network side, I think the industry agrees, is that the complexity of data there means we haven't groomed the data well enough and worked out what it is we want to find out. But I like this product, NTAA, this autonomous threat hunting capability. It spots patterns, what's different from normal and normal for a particular customer's usage,
Right.
and what is that? And sometimes that's it's a network event, but a network event might be a security problem, or it might actually be a non, it might be a lack of resources or something else. So, and I can see the security guys who've come up with this and done some great work internally. They reach conclusions that are in the security domain, but I can see a whole load of network conclusions they reach as they analyze the data. So I think your question is more, is the data there? There's certainly plenty of data there. So I don't know that we need to change all the kit just yet. Whether or not we have enough to do all the meaningful things we want to do, I'm not sure yet. But if you just take an abundance of NetFlow information, you can you can do quite a lot.
Folks on the vendor side, anything you'd add about streaming telemetry or evolutions to make sure we have the right data in the right place?
I think people are very protective of data because they know it has a value.
Yep.
But I mean, it doesn't really have a value until you know how to use it. So I think as you could say basic attitude is I keep it to myself. And I think that you should be more open-minded in seeing that combining the data actually and trading data will help you in your operations.
I tend to agree. I mean, I think simply saying it's mine it doesn't seem to work, right? I mean, I think that there's ways that you can open that up, and particularly with some of the co-creation type environments that we're seeing around 5G and network slicing, those types of things are really quite interesting to that data stream and telemetry. One thing I would add just to sort of broaden the scope and try not to be constrained by the way the things have been in the past, is that telemetry data is going to come from more sources than just the network, right? So if we conceive the idea of truly zero touch, truly autonomous in a scenario where, frankly, the machine is making decisions to do stuff, and that machine is doing a lot, many thousand times a second, that's a hugely valuable source of data that could be used to gain efficiencies within your own organization, the way you're driving the processes, the way you're interacting. And you look at any high performance environment where telemetry is looking at everything, right? And you use that source to make improvements, right? So analytics, just to improve the performance of the network, analytics should also be used for improving the performance of your operational systems, your insight tools, the way you're delivering on your business objectives. It's many sources than just the network infrastructure.
Yeah, I think with that I'm going to lead right into this next question because I think it's where we're headed. I have a question for Magnus. I'm going to hold that though, and I'm going to go right to Alex here, and then I'll come back, which is, we've already kind of tipped our toe into AI and machine learning, and so let me ask Alex and then the rest of you to chime in. Alex, can you describe AI and machine learning tools or the experience you intend to deliver and utilize in your automation and ZSM journey from the Intel perspective?
Sure. So our ultimate goal is to deliver what we call an autonomous data center environment where various elements of the data center are composing themselves automatically and configuring themselves automatically into a fluid infrastructure that you can dynamically program to run the workloads based on SLAs. And so to enable that, we see a few things that need to be done. First, at scale, simply blasting a bunch of data out into the world is never going to work. And so we're adopting what we call a management by exception model, where the right data is streamed at the right time to the right destinations. So we're looking at embedding the analytics and the learning algorithms within the individual components be they CPU boards or PCIe cards or racks or other components in that environment. And the idea is that rather than have some central entity be overburdened with processing of gigabytes and terabytes of data being streamed, we want to do as much as possible at the source. Pinpoint as much of the problem as we can, fix it without anybody else getting involved, and only escalate issues and appropriate telemetry when it's needed. So that fundamentally kind of changes, in our opinion, how we do operations.
Let me just ask this. Does that lead to an edge computing mindset
Yes,
as
right.
well?
So we see more and more happening at the edge as well, and of course the challenge we have is we would like to, we see a general purpose infrastructure environment, whether it's the edge, the core, the cloud, or anything else in between. And so we want to be able to create a consistent set of, a consistent environment that could be operated without human presence. At the same time, we also realize that not everybody is willing to give up control, right? So that's the other aspect of getting the telemetry right. You have to provide the right amount of it with the right intent to those individuals who want to exercise more or less control. It really depends on policies. And so not only are we looking to just blindly, blast the data, as I said, or even if we learn to ship the right kind of data, that's still not enough. What you need is to be able to inject policies that drive the learning process and the determination of what KPIs are the most appropriate for what situations.
Anybody here on the panel want to add your thoughts on what you see happening either with your equipment or products, or in the case of the service providers with artificial intelligence, machine learning, analytics? Is there a first use case that you've already seen happening in your network? Go ahead.
So let me take an example of what we do internally. So we have a solution that basically takes analytics data from, for example, base stations, and historically we used that data to work out the geolocation of individuals across complete network. And that's been a rather algorithmic, hard development solution over a number of years. And a couple of quarters ago, we introduced machine learning to that, and we basically had obviously all of the training data internally, so you could pretty easily move that so we got further accuracy and so on from machine learning. So that's an example of what we've done internally. Right. So that developed incremental accuracy and capability from our side, but I think that's where I believe most vendors to do things today. Internally in the solution, not necessarily externally exposed, but it delivers an incrementally better product.
Okay, Magnus, that's anything you'd add, or any?
I think we have to thread cautiously here to do the full loop, sort of, and start with the recommender systems and using reinforcement learning and things like that in a cautious manner. And we see that we have a lot of research in this area, and not quite ready to use it full out in the product.
Right. Go ahead.
So again, I mean, we're using analytics in many places for many purposes, huge research going on and things like that. I think it clearly has a place, it clearly has a role. What's particularly interesting to me, though, is how you control those policies around the machine learning process. I mean, we did a really interesting demo at Mobile World Congress where we were doing analytics insight from video streams to determine that there had been some accident and we needed to spin our resources, and it was cool. There was stuff flying around and everybody was sort of really quite excited. But I was like, well, how did a person define that policy? How did you define that set of rules across your analytics engine, your data stream, your closed loop controls? Right. How do you bring all that together? Because that is where you need the insight, right? And particularly if you start to fire hierarchical policies that are then based on machine learning as well. Sure. So I see that as being a really key part of this. And you had it in your diagram, the feed, right? The closed loop feed, and magically there's AI analytics, right? I mean, it doesn't happen that well. You need to put some controls in place. And I think that's really interesting to take the next step of the process.
So just to add something, in a traditional closed-loop system, we rely on people to define the policies. And I think as we get more towards the autonomic end state, we're really looking for the closed loop to become self-tuning. And I know, crazy stuff, but it's, well, I guess what I'm suggesting is that over time, it's not the people who are necessarily defining all the policies. The machines might, but there's always a degree of approval in terms of human oversight, right? So the role of the person doesn't go away, it just shifts. It's not about hands-on definition, it's about validation and trust.
Yeah, agreed. And we talked about the edge being involved potentially, and we talked about perhaps how that could be quite innovative for new capabilities. Again, making that easy to do could be a big part of how you unlock the value of these types of systems. Right?
Jump in, go ahead, Clive.
I like to add something here because I find this discussion really interesting because it gives also an indication which problem we have sometimes in the industry about this discussion. Because if you're looking backwards, if you did OSS in collecting some data, in these days we talked about analytics. Well, what is the difference between this old discussion and this new discussion? What does it mean? I think we are talking so much about data analytics and this kind, artificial intelligence, all these nice words, but what does it mean in reality? And from an operator point of view, I can say we are only in the beginning of the learning phase. Nobody has an idea what is the outcome of discussion. We know that it's useful for us as a company to jump in and do some stuff around that one, but my wish is to be a bit more realistic. What is the purpose of this discussion point? And not talking about analytics here and analytics there, not knowing what we're talking about.
Right.
And can I add just one very quick comment, which is to follow on from what you were saying. It's very important, I think, as you say, analytics. Even in the 70s, we looked at automating the, manufacturing. What data can we take to automate anything? It comes back to scientific principle, in fact, that you have to have hypothesis first, you then groom the data and perform the experiment, get the right data and prove whether your hypothesis worked and whether you want to make a policy based on that or not. Yes. Just grooming data, just collecting data, just feeding it in, without meaning, if you like, to algorithms and any other form of analysis won't really end up with much of a result. So importantly, you need domain experts at the moment to make those decisions.
Don't burst the bubble, right?
Yeah.
Two comments on that. I did a panel like this not very long ago, and I didn't mention it here. I wasn't going to, but since you guys kind of brought it up, my feeling is we're in danger of taking all of the things we used to do in the past, like zero crossings and hysteresis to make things not chatter, right, a dampening circuit. We're in danger of taking all of the things we did in the past, and now, you can't talk about it unless it says AI or machine learning. And I that's just part of the industry we live in, and I think it's important to kind of dive through that and say, what we're really talking about is mathematical models, and get to the experts and dig deeper versus letting people wave their hands on AI and machine learning and say it's perfect because we've got AI and machine learning. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So I just want to give one example of this and the human oversight and so on. So I think we all remember the days, many years ago, where we had a phone and we actually used SMS. And there was issues with SMSC, and they were up or down. And all of us know that if you had an Ericsson phone, we would actually magically have the SMSs delivered. But if I had a Nokia phone, for some reason there was a lot of SMS in the outbox, which were never sent. And the point is, that was based on statistics. So people tried to minimize on the network side because people got weekly and monthly reports of failed SMS transactions. so Nokia tried to minimize that they showed up being bad, where the result was that SMSC was actually bad, but people managed based on the reports. So the Ericsson one, which at the time had a very small market share, tried to give a better customer experience. So they did retransmissions and retries, which ended up having a lot of bad KPIs, but good quality of experience. So if you don't have the right customer management of this, of the intent, then we're going to end up with, optimizing the wrong thing. And having the AI optimizing for the lowest KPI issues going to lead to zero revenue. Because at that time, we obviously got whatever 20 cents for each text message sent. So, getting the right thing done is important, not only getting the KPIs looking good.
Yes. The one other, I want to add one other thing and just test this with you guys, but the one thing I like about, we'll call it the analytics, the AI and machine learning, is we don't know all the time what normal is or what a baseline is. And so, in the past, you're going to set a threshold or something, and it's 5 or it's 10 or it's whatever. It's some number, and I don't know, if the alarm goes off too many times, I'll change it because I don't like all those alarms, right? But now what is really nice, and you see it especially like in DDoS, the distributed denial of service attacks, people are fighting back with that by defining, instead of having to see the malware or to see the specific thing, instead you know what normal is. Just like normal for a human, what does normal for me mean if I had biometrics? What is normal for, you see that same thing in concussion protocol in the United States with if you have kids in high school in the US, they will go through and take some tests on a computer to establish what is normal for that child. And if they get injured in an activity in football or soccer or whatever, they can run that same test again and say, no, you're not normal because your normal is here in baseline. So to me, that's one of the most powerful things of this is, I don't know what I want for this. I need to know what normal is, and if I see abnormal, I need to do something else. Anybody's free to comment on that if you want.
And so 20 years ago on the enterprise side, we learned that normal varies. I used to work for a company that did a lion's share of tax returns in the United States. And we found that, 2 days out of the entire 365, there were peaks. And those peaks corresponded to first when your tax forms came back to you from your employer in February, and then April 15th is when the taxes were due. And so those were peaks, and then there were valleys, right? And so normal looked different on different days.
Understood.
And it's very dangerous to kind of have a very static view of it.
Good comment. Excellent comment.
And
there's a temporal aspect to
right. The
normal.
other thing to realize is that this is not new ground we're breaking, right? Maybe in the telco space this is new,
Sure.
but certainly not for companies like Google and eBay and Amazon and others. They've been doing this forever.
Good comment.
And we should learn from them.
Good.
And what they do is not really look for the error, they look for a way to prevent it in the first place.
Predictive.
And predictive analytics is something that is really the goal, I think.
Yep. Go ahead, Oliver.
I would just add a quick comment, because I always like to counter to the Google and Amazon and all of those have done a lot. Building the internet and building 5G and 4G and 3G and building MPLS and building global organisms that have lived, and the telephone network for 100 years, we had to learn what normal looked like quite a lot there as well. I think we just did it more by hand. What's available now with the compute and the storage power is that we can make digital models and apply algorithms, which platform providers can do because they only run a platform that's, at the moment, theoretically not a network, although we all know they're building networks. But what we can do now, though, is rather than do it more by hand or by, individual sort of nodal basis, is make more digital twins that we can apply these models to, and that's a good thing. And particularly perhaps in healthcare, that'll, doing that with our humans, the human form is going to be absolutely huge. So,
Yep. I want to get something in here just because before we get too down this path, the word intent and intent-based has been thrown out a couple times. I'm going to go back to Magnus and then anybody chime in here, but intent-based networking has been getting positioned by some vendors a lot within the last 12 months. We've even saw it in several of the slides in the presentations today. My question is, how do you see intent-based networking adding or subtracting to the ZSM and the overall goal of network automation?
Yeah, I think that intent-based networking is comes from a need to go towards a more user and value-centric world, and not have to bother about too much of the details in the network and the configuration and control. And SDN orchestration and automation is of course a good first step. And then I've seen some companies are arguing that they have pieces of software that does intent-based networking. And in some cases it's probably true, but I think in general we are leaning towards policies. We think that policies are the way that you express your intent, and high-level service policies are useful in this. And we've been contributing to IETF and to MEF, and most recently also we have a lot of contribution being a leading contributor to ONAP in the policy framework area. Apart from that, I think we shouldn't forget DevOps. DevOps is a way to work between vendors and operators to find out what the intent really is and how you make a network out of that.
The ultimate in intent.
Yeah, right. And I think that we have numerous examples of where we have a great success with our customers working together, and also the experts on either side, they get excited and they trust each other more, and they build together, and it's amazing results. One last thing about the 5G. I mean, you really have to think about the intents of the new players in 5G. You're getting industry and society and enterprises, and what's their intent of what they want to do. And you have to think about to really how you bridge that gap.
I'm going to go there in 5G in a second, but go, Alex, I wanted you to chime in because I could see you wanting to add
So
something.
to me, intent is not really about policies, but it's about a change in the desired state. And for that to work, you have to have a good model of what your world looks like. And for that, you need to have a good discovery mechanism. And also, if you're going to do this in a zero-touch way, you need to have inference. And we don't really have those things yet, right? Not to the degree that we need them. And that's the big challenge.
Nokia says they have all that. No,
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
So just on the intent front, intent-based networking is fine, and I think, again, if you go back to the point I was trying to make before about looking at what the business you're in and what you're trying to achieve, I think there's a crying demand here to map business intent to network intent, right? I mean,
Yes. Yes.
that at the heart of what we're trying to do. We recognize that we're in this multi-domain environment where the domains are going to become more and more autonomous to what they do.
Yes.
So being able to map what you're trying to deliver from a business outcome,
Right.
in terms of what you can do in terms of your infrastructure, it is key to this end-to-end service management piece, right? Is it a policy? I suspect it is an element of a policy. Is it the same policy? Probably not, right? I mean, you're going to have a situation where there's policies to describe business intent and then map onto network intent, and there will be then metrics and machine learning and data about all that mapping to see whether, and you'll have different processes, and that will then also map onto different closed loop processes. You'll have business-driven closed loops, network-driven closed loops, and they'll be linked by all that business in intent mapping. And it does connect to 5G if you ask me another question.
I like you mentioning the business intent, though, mapped to the networking intent, because so in the past, we forced humans to translate that in some ways, right? And somebody's just trying to, I have a business intent to deliver a high quality service with these kinds of things and make this customer happy. and then now I have to learn MPLS or something, right? And
Yeah, I'd add to that, yeah. You know, we talk to lots of enterprises and, well, of course, when we talk to their networking teams, they might want to talk MPLS to us, but the general belief is that eventually a big bank won't need to and shouldn't ever have had to probably talk about MPLS and a big retailer perhaps even more. And so, you know, we're trying to abstract it and we're trying to abstract away from all of that, and intent goes hand in hand with that. So certainly at that one, if you like, thin layer perhaps of the user interface, and I think you mentioned it, that we want, and then Verizon are going to, you know, push on this quite hard, that we want our customers to be able to express, you know, intents for what they want from their capabilities in various ways. And of course, then we've got to map that to a model that has inference and all the other stuff underneath. But if we're going to be customer-led, which we've got to at the moment, you know, that's what's driving all of this dynamism really, and hopefully a bit of money as well, but we'll see. But we have to have an intent, at least allow our customers to express what they want in intents, and then we've got to make sense of it.
Go ahead, Simon.
I mean, even to the extent where they're defining their own intent, right? So not just necessarily saying, this is what I'd like to buy from you.
Yeah.
It's more a case of they're saying, look, I want this capability. I'm putting some skin in the
Business
game.
intent.
You're putting some skin in the game. And it might be a bit far-fetched, but we talk about network slicing and this co-creation type environment, exposing capabilities of the edge to trying to deploy microservices within that service chain that are somebody else's. It really puts a lot of pressure on what is that service boundary with your systems, right? And what I like about 5G and network slicing is it puts pressure on all of those concepts. Multi-domain, sub-slicing, where do you define them, how are the policies made, how do you control that, how do you expose it? It just challenges that thought process.
Is 5G, so let's just stay on the 5G for a second. Is 5G / network slicing, I know they're not, but I'm just going to say it that way. Is that a case where kind of the rubber's going to meet the road because we have to have network automation, we have to have these pieces, and we'll see a lot of these components come together with Etsy, ZSM, and others almost out of necessity there versus some other place in the network? Go ahead.
I think it's a clear opportunity, and if you miss it, then that could be a big risk, right? I mean, I think a risk to this technology is not using it as a vehicle to test some of those hypotheses of the past and how can we do things differently. And I think we certainly move into automation native type principles where this just isn't going to work by doing it by hand. And if you do it by hand, you're actually going to constrain what you're going to do with this network so much that actually just sitting back and saying it's got more costly to operate isn't enough, right?
Yep. Let me get Magnus in, and then Alex, and then Oliver.
And I would go even further. I would say automation is absolutely necessary. And so automation to 5G is what sort of computers were to the moon landing. I mean, it's you can't cope this. It's impossible.
Alex, did you?
I think 5G is interesting because it has elements of hyperscale, and the velocity of fulfillment has to be very, very fast. And obviously, we're kind of getting into the world where we're dealing with inter-opco collaborative, or I guess I would call it collaborative management, if you will. It's no longer just one entity doing it. And so that challenges all the existing ways of doing things. I don't think we would be able to keep up at all if we continue to do it the way we do it now.
Agreed. Oliver, go.
Yeah, I completely agree, except for I'd like to put the completely counter-argument just for the sake of it, only that economics does play a big factor. I think in the telco industry we do have to automate, and when we hit massive scale, even more so. And we all know that the pie is getting bigger and people want more and the use cases are more complex. The only anecdote I'd say is that, you know, I was a coder at Ericsson 25 years ago, and we didn't believe that you'd have coders anymore in the future because there's going to be too much code, too much need for code, and we would automate it all, right? We'd have all these 5G languages. But now, 25 years later, apparently it's cool again to be a coder, and we have millions of coders across the world manually coding, if you like. So, you know, sometimes we go back. I'm not sure that the automation we're talking about really is in the world of coding, but we have got to trend back to, you know, people being more hands-on in the way that they do it. But I think what we're really talking about is taking cost and complexity out of telco business, and yeah, we've got to do that.
Go ahead,
I
Klaus.
think this automation discussion is a little bit independent from the 5G discussion. I think on slicing as well. Slicing, I think we can slice also with 4G today. There's no need for 5G in order to realize slicing. But without automation, we are not able to deliver slicing or 5G or this kind of stuff. And then completely with Magnus, I think that is a prerequisite that we are going for automation. Otherwise, it will be difficult to run the networks which we have today, because based on the complexity we have. The complexity is a key driver for that one, not 5G or slicing.
Very good. Go ahead.
So let me just maybe touch on the potentially big elephant in the room, which is that at the end of the day, the telcos have competition for the complete wallet share of spend, which comes from a lot of the OTTs. And the OTTs started, majority of them, as Alex said earlier, from the beginning to automate everything.
Yep.
So we see a couple of greenfield telecom operators that have launched. We have recently the one in India, which have basically completely changed the playing field in India. We have another one joining up soon in maybe Japan, and we have a couple of other ones looking at various markets. And I think that when a established operator look and see what significant advantages you get once you have automated, I think there's a lot of fear around that.
Yep.
So the question at the end of the day is, can you use 5G and the capital expenditure you're going to do for that to drive this change?
As a catalyst
Yes.
for the change.
Yes, but I think we should really understand the risk. If you don't get it done,
Yep.
then you may have a very uncertain business outcome in the
Yep.
future.
No, I'd agree. I think it is an opportunity. I mean, retrofitting it to everything is painful, right, for any service provider. But doing something you've never done before and using that as a vehicle to at least challenge your thinking, to think a little bit differently, what are you going to lose, right?
Right.
So it's worth doing in that respect.
Agreed. We are down to the final minute here or two, and I have a final set of questions for the dynamic group we have here, which is, this is to Klaus and Oliver, and I wanted each party to kind of share advice with the other. So in this case, Klaus and Oliver, what advice would you have for the vendor community represented here, trying to increase automation for their products and services, and to help you in realizing your ZSM transformation? So Oliver, what advice would you give the vendors?
I'm not sure I read this question, but I'm prepared. Well, I think,
if any, just keep doing what you're doing.
And keep it short, because I think these guys have had some great comments that I'm learning from. So, but I like the idea of trust. So we've got to work out whose skin in the game is it. We're trying to open up. Certainly at Verizon, we're pushing this open standard approach, this lowering the bar. We all play together, and that's risky for everyone, right? And the vendors, yeah. So
I want to hit on that just real quick. We are fundamentally transforming the value chain in the ecosystem.
Yep.
And there's the rub and the friction on the trust.
Absolutely.
Right? How am I going to survive as a business entity and thrive? I don't just want to survive, I want to thrive.
And you made a good point that it's not that we are looking to change the vendors rapidly. Our ecosystem at Verizon, I often, present on it and say, it's not for us to dictate who's in all these domains and who's the best, that will play out as it plays out. We want everyone to be a success, but we do need to, I think the trust we need to get together and work out the new business models, and that even extends into the customers. I had a customer recently say to me, okay, so you're giving me all this choice, but who hedges on that?
Yes.
Do they pay for that choice? That they might go up or down with their service, or do we? And of course, they pay for it at the moment. But trust, we've got to work out that trust model and the business model that gives us all, the skin in the new game.
Got it. Klaus.
I'm more or less in that what Oliver said, and concerning the interaction or collaboration between vendors and operator, I think we have a good way in ZSM to work with the vendors together. For sure, my wish would be to be more open and to listen more to others, not only focusing on the products which I have in my mind to deliver. And think that might sometimes guide in the wrong direction, because then you are focusing on your product and not what's underneath what the operator is asking for. And that is more or less. I think we are in a good way in ZSM to work together on that one, but to move more in the direction, in the listening mode, that would be nice.
Okay. Last question is to the vendors, and we'll start with Magnus and just work our way down. What advice would you have that you've just been burning to give these service providers?
I'd like to take the opportunity again to talk about DevOps. If you have a structured process, and you have sort of build a trust there in a project, you can go very fast and sort of not disappoint any sort of the vendor or the operator.
Simon, yeah.
I think listen to your own advice, right? I mean, this is a two-way street. I mean, there's things that we collectively don't know, right? So we need to work together to get across some things, and that means resetting perhaps business models, but with a recognition that there needs to be a business model, right?
Yep.
And so I think
Yep.
it's just a two-way street, particularly in these new areas, right?
Yep. Alex?
So we've spent pretty much the entire time talking about technology. But all of this stuff will fail miserably if we don't proactively bring about change in process and people, right? So having been part of other transformations in other industries, I can safely tell you that fear is what drives lack of adoption of this type of stuff. And
Yep.
fear is
Yep.
driven by all sorts of realities from the operational perspective.
It's really
And so my advice is proactively address that ahead of time so that by the time the technology gets to a maturity point where it's viable, everyone's willing to accept it and there are processes in place to accommodate it.
Very good. Per?
So actually, I think connecting extremely well to what you said, Alex, my advice is basically drive innovation through competition to reach the objectives. Because then you know that there has been a competition to reach that end state which Alex talks about, and you know that the best solution and technology and implementation won. You know that you got something that was good, not something that was just, well, this is what we delivered.
Achievable.
Well,
It's a difference.
the most agreeable between all parties, but nothing that was sharp enough.
Exactly. Okay. With that, we're going to bring this to a close. I'm going to hand it back to Narit. Please give the panelists a round of applause. I thought they did a great job. Thank you.